Hello, my name is Brandy Lynn, and I did this presentation on gender-based violence. Uh, it's focused on domestic violence with women. So what is gender-based violence? It can be described as any form of violence that is directed at an individual based on their gender. It's based on an abundance of power and is carried out with the intention to make the person or even a group of people feel inferior or subordinate. It can be sexual, physical, verbal, psychological, or even economical. It's also referred to as like GBV, gender-based violence, which is therefore to continue of acts that violate women's basic human rights. So that's what I'm talking about with domestic violence. So the different types of gender-based violence can be emotional violence, which is insults and just threats, physical violence, as in pushing, hitting, gun violence, and knife attacks, and even the worst, murder, sexual harassment to sexual exploitation and trafficking of girls and women. You hear about it now as even men can be trafficking or be trafficked. Genital mutilation to slavery, mass rapes, and sexual tortures during wartime to the rape of refugees and displaced girls and women. Other things like that picture shown, shaming a female, mentally harassing a female. There's several different gender-based violences. So the most common gender-based violence is what I am doing this presentation on is domestic violence. It's the most common type of gender-based violence. Basically 1 in 4 women. Also, men can be a victim of domestic violence. But my report basically was just focused on women. Domestic violence is used to describe intimate partner violence, violence that occurs between two individuals in an intimate relationship. It also can be, domestic violence can also be a family, just depending, but mostly domestic violence is within intimate partner. Women are majority victims, but both men and women can be predators or victims, like I mentioned. Domestic violence is not limited to intimate partner violence. However, it also includes violence within the broader domestic or family. I also mentioned that. So why is domestic violence have higher rates in rural areas? Lack of cell phone service or lack of a landline for somebody to call for help. Limited or no transportation. There may be only one car in the family, so there's limited transportation, and if you live out in the country somewhere, there's no bus or cabs that go out that way. Long response times for police and medical emergency teams to get to that emergency. Weapon and dangerous tools more commonly available than in urban areas. Seasonal of work that may leave the woman trapped with the abuser for long periods of time. So if her husband or significant other works farm or in the summertime as building houses and stuff, so when winter comes around there's no work, that may cause alcohol, which may increase the violent tendencies. Limited access to routine health care. So dealing with social norms of domestic violence, society, male dominance, or particular systems in which the wife is viewed as the husband's possession or property. For instance, in different beliefs, the man or the male is the dominant figure in the relationship. Also, women in rural areas probably less likely to leave a violent relationship if it should occur, and more tolerant of the issue. They just tolerate the issue other than leaving the relationship. That's a social norm. This low level of education, for instance, having a lower education could be to a disadvantage. The culture held the idea that women do not need education because their assigned role is to stay at home and take care of household duties, including childbearing. I think that this is more not really in my generation. I know a lot of females that are educated, but a lot of the older generations, this falls underneath that, as in the woman stays at home and takes care of the household duties, and as the men work, and that was just a social norm. So with literature review, I found out the social learning theory was one, which is social learning theory of domestic violence. An individual begins to learn behavior from their parents at a young age in life. Parents and guardians have the most significant influence on a child's actions, attitudes, and interpersonal interactions. This explains how aggressive patterns develop, which provokes people to have aggressively, and what sustains such actions after they have initiated. Children that are exposed to domestic violence, or violence at that, are too prone to violent behavior because they learn to act violently from their phones. So to me, I would probably put this under social norms too. If a child grows up in a domestic relationship or a family household, they're probably that's going to be like their social norm, like that's normal to them. An individual begins to learn behavior from their parents at a young age in life. Parents and guardians have the most, which I already said that. So children learn from their parents. So if a son sees his dad abusing his mother, he's going to think that's okay. He's going to learn and say, well, my dad did it, so when I get older, I think, I can do that too. So children who witness domestic violence may be a greater risk of being in a domestic violence relationship in the future, and that is man or female. Sociologists state that men batter because of learned violence in their families as children, and that women seek out abusive men because they see their mothers being abused. Even when you think a child is not paying attention, they take everything in because they are very perceptive. Little eyes and ears take in sights and sounds without missing much. So again, that's where you get that social learning theory with children, seeing that, their whole life they think that's okay, and then women seem to think when they grow up, well, my mom did it, my mom was in an abusive relationship, that's all I can handle. So learned hopelessness is also was in that in my literature review for domestic violence. American psychologist Walker investigated the behavior of women who remain in abusive relationships. Women frequently have very sound justifications for remaining, such as fear of self or child-inflicted harm, or an inability to provide for themselves financially. They learned helplessness theory was founded on the idea that battered women share traits like low self-esteem, withdrawal, or a sense of control loss. So when most women are in domestic violence situations, they just learned the helplessness. They just learned to stay with it and handle it, a fear of leaving. So to continue, domestic violence usually starts as a minor incident. Victims may be shocked and not think it will ever happen again. As in, if a woman gets slapped, that abuser could say, I'll never do that again if you stay. And that woman believes him because she loves him. Women actively and considerably choose their actions during this process based on their changing circumstances. For example, they leave for brief periods to flee the violence and to emphasize their dissatisfaction, hoping this will end the violence. Initially, they usually are not trying to break up the relationship. Instead, they are trying to negotiate a soft restart. They believe it will never happen again. But they continue to be committed to the relationship because they, like everyone else, believe in the possible of reform or of that person changing. Again, they, are scared to leave. There may be children involved. They're scared to start over. They're scared of what may happen. They just feel hopeless. So some intervention I found was like prevention, protection, and justice. Protection, which involves attempting to stop further harm by taking victims out of the situation and ordering offenders to stay away from their victims, which aims to go to justice, which entitles taking action against domestic violence offenders. Then it aims to prevent the domestic violence incidents from occurring in the first place. So aiming to, not let that happen in the first place would be the prevention. Okay, so there are some hope in more recent viewpoints, like the one provided by the framework theory. So it starts with an individual. Factors in an individual biological and personal history, but increases the possibility of becoming a victim or predator of violence. So what this model is the prevention of domestic violence. So we would start with the individual, get the history, their attitudes, the beliefs of the violence, even some back history of it. Then you go into relationships, factors within an individual closest relationships, such as social peers, intimate partners, and family members that increase their risk. So what members increase the risk of domestic violence? Did mom have a domestic violence issue, before? That kind of thing. Community, factors on the community level such as relationships with school, workplace, neighborhoods that may increase the individual's risk. And society are cultural norms that create an environment that accepts or condones the violence, or the not equal. So this is just the social. This is just to help somebody from when you're talking to somebody about domestic violence, to prevent that domestic violence. So the justice, West Virginia Domestic Violence Criminal Act. So there's two different, they don't classify it as domestic violence. It's domestic battery and domestic assault. So domestic battery is any person who unlawfully or intentionally makes physical contact of an insulting or provoking nature with their family or household member, or in unlawful and intentional cases causes physical harm, which for that first offense, if guilty, confined to jail or not, and it could be no more or not more than 12 months, and or fined a $500 fine. Domestic assault, a person who unlawfully attempts to commit a violent injury against their family or household member. The first offense, if guilty, confined to jail for not more than 6 months and fined not more than $100. So as you can see, I don't think that's enough. If there's a domestic battery or a domestic assault, I think that there needs to be more to that. Maybe there needs to be some anger management, not just jail time, but anger management may help, or depending on his history, maybe, or her history, maybe more jail time to stop it. Okay, so another intervention or a way to help women would be empowerment. Custom empowerment intervention typically gives that person a tool for self-determination, raises awareness, and boosts their self-esteem. Also keeping in mind their advantage for wellness and social inclusion in their daily life. This expands This includes expanding the personal knowledge of coping mechanisms, self-management, and coping skills. So just giving that individual the resources on, domestic violence. So in West Virginia, I looked up there, West Virginia does have help in prevention. So in West Virginia, there are 18 organizations that offer some kind of domestic violence assistance. These programs are available in 15 different cities within West Virginia. Based on the likelihood that each program will offer all the services within a category, emergency services is the most prevalent category of service in West Virginia, while housing services is the least. Emergency shelter and self-planning or safety planning are the two most frequent requested individual services in West Virginia, while on-site schooling and mobile advocacy are the two least frequent requests. So within that, there are facilities that will have emergency shelter for somebody within domestic violence that are trying to get out and they need a place to go, and then a safety planning. They will help them with the safety planning. So here are some of my references. And that's the end. I appreciate you all listening. And have a good evening.